Hello and welcome to Running in High Heels, a platform, not heel, for the modern woman. I'm your host, Megan Lee Pitseedlik, and today I'm going to be talking about why we sometimes empathize and identify with the villain of a story. So stick around. We all love to think of ourselves as the good guy in our story, but isn't it curious that every once in a while we totally relate and empathize with a villain? In this podcast, I'm going to be explaining why we empathize with some villains, the differences between villains and heroes, and what that means about reflecting on ourselves and our own human nature. So villains come in all shapes and forms, all plots and evil plans to take over the universe or whatever evil villains do. But the common thread is that they really amplify the worst qualities in human nature. Things like greed and anger, stuff like that. So one of my favorite villains was the Uma Thurman version of Poison Ivy. I totally wanted to be her. She was beautiful. She had this wonderful layer.
Hi there.
But really what made me empathize with her was her backstory, and that's a key component to why we empathize with some villains. The humanistic qualities about some villains make us totally empathize with them. Poison Ivy was this really meek character. She was kind of walked all over by the world, and she only took solace in her friendships basically with her plants, which, to be honest with you, is totally relatable, especially in COVID, except for I accidentally always kill my plants, but let's not tell her that. When she gained powers, she decided that she wanted to basically overtake the earth, let Mother Nature destroy all humanity, and that's obviously an extreme reaction to the pain that was inflicted upon her when she was just a normal person. That's what is so relatable. You feel bad for her backstory and how the world treated her. And she felt that pain and then wanted to inflict it on everybody else. Heroes and villains are not that different. They have many of the same human qualities like we all do, but the main difference is how they react to adversity. A hero, in hero stories, you see a lot where they kind of go off the straight and narrow. They kind of stray from their good ways. The difference between the hero and the villain is that a hero, when they look at themselves in the mirror, they see the dark path that they're going down. What they do is they course correct. A villain tends to double down. They end up deciding to lean into the bad parts of their human nature. That's the main difference between the two. We tend to think of good and bad as a really black and white concept when it's actually a lot of gray area. We can get cut off on the way home and then take it out on the first person that we see when we walk through the door. Does that make us an evil person? No, that just makes us really agitated with Nashville traffic. Am I projecting? But making the conscious decision to not do that, or to try to not do that, or to apologize after we do that and course correct is when we decide to be the hero in our own story. And it's not a bad thing that we empathize with the villain. We do understand their background, but you cannot forgive a villain's choice to want to make everybody else feel their pain. Of course, there are different types of villains that are a little bit more confusing. I'm going to go into an extended version of this where we're going to talk a little bit more about what I think about villains and how I think that we're going to see villains depicted in storylines coming up in this next decade due to everything that has happened around us. But I want to point out the Cinderella stepmother because she's a very, very relatable villain. Especially the version of her that's in Ever After. If you've ever seen it, it has Drew Barrymore. I love that movie. The stepmother is obviously really unkind to Cinderella, but at the same time, she's doing something that we actually see a lot in society where she's trying to elevate and help her own daughters succeed, and anybody who gets in the way she'll just kind of pummel. And that's she really sees Cinderella as a threat to the success of her own daughters. It's very realistic villain in a story, as opposed to some of these more abstract and extreme versions of villains in a story. And I wanted to point that out because villains aren't necessarily these evil, want to take over the world, plotting, conniving characters. It's just an amplification of the worst qualities in human nature, and then the doubling down, the deciding to keep making these bad, awful decisions instead of looking in the mirror and doing the internal work and becoming the hero of the story. So that's just some food for thought. If you want to hear more about some of the villains I'm going to talk about, you can meet me in the extended rest of this podcast. I had people tell me that they wanted them to be a little bit longer, so you can come with me on the crazy journey down that rabbit hole if you'd like. Welcome to Running in High Heels Extended. So I wanted to explore a little bit more about villains and things that I foresee in the future of some of our entertainment and our literature and things that are going to come out of this really odd time. We're living in this time where it's really apparent that there's a lot more gray area than we thought. Things aren't all black and white. Things are always good and bad. Things that we thought were good or bad, and things that we thought were bad are good. And it's a really confusing time. And I think that's going to be reflected in some of the art that comes out of this period into the next decade. One of the more confusing villains for me was the character Dexter. I don't know if you guys know the show Dexter, but he's a serial killer who kills serial killers, which is very confusing because on one hand you're like, he's the bad guy. On the other hand, you're like, he's the good guy because he's killing serial killers. At the end of the day, though, he is still a psychopath and he ruins a lot of lives around him. So obviously he's still bad, but it's definitely confuses your moral compass when you're watching the show. So if you don't want that, do not watch the show. It is a rabbit hole. You go into darkness a lot because you're like, I don't know if he's good or if he's bad or if I'm rooting for him or if I'm not rooting for him. Like, it's very confusing. There are a lot of good characters that we saw kind of fall into their own oblivion. And honestly, coming up into the next decade, that is a trend that I think that we will see. We're going to see a lot more of this gray area, that good guys that become bad guys, or good guys that show some not so good qualities. Some of my favorite characters that are like that are like Sherlock Holmes. He's the good guy, but he has some not so great qualities. Same thing with like Robin Hood, but those guys are not what I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see more complex heroes and villains coming out of this weird time period when we look at literature and film that comes from the inspiration of this moment that we're living in. That being said, some other characters that I really like, that are really characters that started out as a good guy and then turned bad, are characters like Khaleesi in Game of Thrones. You watch her whole entire storyline. She starts off as the good guy. You're rooting for her the entire time, and then she turns into the bad guy. And it's funny because her story really parallels Cersei's story. We are entered into the Game of Thrones where Cersei is already the bad guy, though. But Khaleesi wasn't the bad guy. She was innocent in the beginning of the story, but we always think of Cersei as bad, but we don't know Cersei's backstory. And from the little that we do know, I didn't read the book, so I'm just going off of the TV show. The little that we do know, she has some things, really crappy things that happen to her, and you wonder, is that kind of the same as Khaleesi, that she might have been good at one point and then turned evil? You see that parallel happen a lot, that fall from grace, and it kind of gives you this idea of that it's possible for you to start as a good guy and then turn bad. Breaking Bad is like that too. I didn't watch all of those seasons, but as a man who makes a series of really bad illegal decisions and he just turns into a bad guy, in my opinion, in the end of it. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I didn't want to. I didn't like that he was like descending into this really dark place. And I think that you have to keep in mind, because this can be confusing, especially in your own life when you're trying to figure out what's good, what's bad, and how to make those judgment calls. And the truth is, I think that you really have to do the best with what you know. And sometimes you're gonna make decisions that in hindsight are not good decisions, or you're gonna believe in something that ends up being untrue. And I think that it's really the course correction and being able to look at something for what it is and not double down on your bad choices. So if you course correct yourself when you know better and you do better, I think that that is how you stick to your compass the best that you can. Because to be honest with you, you never see the whole picture. You don't always have all the information. You don't know what you don't know. And that's the first step to making better decisions, is knowing that you don't know what you don't know. But that doesn't mean that you should just be paralyzed and make no decisions. You make the best decision with what's in front of you. You make the best moral decision with what's in front of you. And then if you learn later on that this isn't what it seems, you hold on to that critical thinking, you reassess, you reevaluate, you have the ability to admit when you're wrong, and then you go forward doing better because you know better. And I hope that kind of sheds light on the gray area a little bit. Let me know what you guys think about me doing a little off the cuff extended version. I got feedback that people wanted this to be a little bit longer, so I thought I would just add a little something extra. If you liked it, please let me know. Besides that, keep living your beautiful life running in high heels. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Running in High Heels podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Let us know what you think. We're going to be releasing some publications, so find our website. It is linked on all of those sites. And hopefully we'll have some new, cool, interesting articles up for you guys. As always, keep living your beautiful life while running in high heels.